Since it is now just after 6, I will invite whoever is on the floor or standing to take whatever seat has something that says reserved on it. You are now, it's free zone now for all of those whatever unclaimed seats there might be. And, if you can pull into the aisles, as long as there's no fire marshal around, feel free to sit even further in the front, especially you guys in the back outside. A few quick announcements. Michael Speaks will be here a week from yesterday, Monday the 20th. If you're looking at the schedule, do not come on the 22nd because Vinnie Moss will not be here on the 22nd. We're looking to reschedule. Could be April 30, May 1st. More likely, I think what we're going to end up doing, because that's so late for us, is pushing it to the fall, probably October. Year-end show, now that there's a captive audience, Friday, May 8th, opens to the public at 5. Please come. We have an expert year-end show team that is turning it into a great party atmosphere, I assure you, on a very low budget. Also, two mercenary financial announcements. We're having our second year of YARC this summer in July for anyone who that is interested in basically a career discovery program to improve their portfolio for graduate school or for whatever other reason. That will be in the month of July, 3 weeks in July. And we're also going to have another sort of Summer Institute on design techniques, specifically a series of digital design workshops called Platforms that will start at the end of May and go through something like the middle of June, but check the website for that, for those set of courses that we're also offering. Tonight, it's a great privilege and pleasure to welcome Ben von Berkel to UIC and Chicago. Ben's visit here tonight has been made possible by the Burnham Plan Centennial Committee. As you know, Ben has been commissioned to produce one of the two Burnham pavilions in Millennium Park, the other to be done by Zaha Hadid. Among the many people responsible for this undertaking, just want to mention a couple tonight. Emily Harris, the Executive Director of the Centennial Committee, who mobilized this ambitious undertaking and has seen it through all kinds of hurdles in an incredibly short time. And Joe Rosa, Chief Curator of Architecture and Design at the Art Institute, and also a regular adjunct faculty member here, who curated the list of possible designers and situated and shaped the content and scope of the endeavor. So I want to thank Emily and Joe and all the others who have made possible what will be a very exciting display of architectural virtuosity in Millennium Park this summer, including Ed Euler from the Park District, Adele Simmons, and Julie Burrows, among many, many others, but I won't turn this into an Oscars event. So their credits will be seen soon. And you can see we have behind us the propaganda. I have to say, it's a great event. There is one thing though, this logo reminds me of a tipsy Frosty the Snowman. Too many drinks in the cold. For the facts, Ben studied architecture at the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam before receiving his diploma from the Architectural Association in London in 1987. A year later, Ben co-founded Von Berkel and Boss Architecture Bureau with Caroline Boss, which a decade later became renamed UNStudio for United Net Studio, to mark Ben and Caroline's changing conception of the way to think about the global practice of architecture and the tremendous expansion in the scale, quantity, and geographic diversity of their operations and collaborations. In that same year, they published their 3-volume monograph, Move, which has just been re-released on its 10-year anniversary. In addition to Move, they have published the more recent collection of projects and essays entitled Digital Models. They published a monograph on the Mercedes-Benz Museum entitled Buy Me a Mercedes-Benz. They have a collection of short and significant essays from 1992 called Delinquent Visionaries, and many other publications. The 20-year history of this award-winning and internationally exhibited and published projects ranges from infrastructural, the very early or relatively early 1996 Erasmus Bridge in Rotterdam, the Arnhem Station, the Prins Claus Bridge, to a series of thoughtful single-family residences from the early, one of my favorite bunker types, the Villa Wilbrink, the Mobius House, and the Villa NM in the Catskills, which recently, as you saw or heard, unfortunately burned down a year ago, soon after its completion, to offices, urban design plans, and cultural institutions, including the BMW Museum, as well as the recent theaters in Lelystad and Graz, and on and on. In addition to this incredibly consistent design, production, and writing, which together make up an early instance, really, of introducing the idea of the diagram into architecture, because Ben and Caroline were central to that discussion. Ben is also professor and head of architecture at the Städelschule in Frankfurt, a member of the research board at the Berkel Institute, and is taught at Princeton, Columbia, UCLA, and the AA. One of my favorite Ben van Berkel lines, one I've heard on more than one occasion, so it's not exactly always just spur of the moment, but I think it's programmatic with Ben. This is back in the days when we used slides instead of PowerPoint. When a slide would go slightly out of focus, that maybe only Ben could notice, Ben would say, and this is better delivered for full effect in a Dutch accent, so try to imagine this if you will. Could we have a little more ambition on the projector, please? And I think that that's actually a pretty good model for architecture today, which is that we could use a little more ambition on the projection. This leads to a little bit of a rant, no surprise. So I ask Ben's indulgence. I'm proud to say that after the list of potential architects was assembled by Joe and vetted by the committee and potential donors, the schools, IIT and UIC, were allowed to choose which architect they would be affiliated with, and I'm very happy to say that we got our first choice, namely Ben. Not just for long-standing reasons of friendship and intellectual respect, but because we believe that UNStudio's work sets a standard that we aim for here in the school, and it shares a great deal of sympathetic overlap with its mission and vision. So one has to be attentive to the inevitable whisperings and rumblings one hears around town when the two pavilions are discussed, which is, I know Chicago architects. So these, I would say, whisperings, somewhat of resentment and parochialism, are, one has to say, a major problem with much of the current scene in local architecture, and really one of the limiting factors on its intellectual reach and ambition. Of course, there's notable exceptions to this, and many on our own faculty, and in particular Doug Garofalo among them, who in fact is collaborating with UNStudio on the pavilion in the park. Still, the tenor of the question is disheartening from the point of view of Chicago. It basically translates as, why not me? Except that that would be too selfish to say out loud, and so it's framed as, why no Chicago architects? But rather than the why not us response, I think it would be more fruitful and perhaps more Dutch attitude would be appropriation, which is to say, he is us. In other words, take credit rather than cry foul. Or to take a page from Frank Lloyd Wright, who, when introducing Mies to a local audience in Chicago for the first time after Mies was named to be head of the Armour Institute, said something like, Chicago, I give you my Mies van der Rohe. Coming from a city which is quite rightly proud of Obama and whose platform is to bring the U.S. back into the rest of the world, I think a lesson for Chicago's architecture could also aspire to re-enter the rest of the world and lift the conceptual trade barriers that would isolate the city in a bubble. And basically of rent. Though there's a postscript. In 1990, Ram Koolhaas organized a conference at Delft entitled How Modern is Dutch Architecture? And in fact, Ben participated in that conference. Without getting into the nuances, Rem's answer was, not very. And it struck me that this was similar to something that Colin Rowe had determined 35 years earlier with regard to Chicago architecture. In other words, Rowe's famous essay, The Chicago Frame, could also be titled, How Modern is Chicago Architecture? And the answer would also be, for Rowe, not very. One of the reasons that Rowe gave, without getting into the minutiae of it, is that Rowe saw a disjunction between speculator-driven Chicago frame versus the ideologically speculative European frame. In other words, the market forces, economic forces, and the high ideas of architecture were what the divide was and why Chicago didn't really count as modern. What's interesting is that it's fallen to recent Dutch architecture to overcome that divide. In other words, what Rowe denigrated as economic speculation of the market is really central, and also central to Ben's work, in part of that realignment in what in Holland might have go under the name of a kind of radical pragmatism. But in Ben's work, I would say it's, you know, a key part of the work is how to mix these two things. In other words, the work is at once mass cultural, mass consumer cultural, as well as modernist. It's a mixture, even if you will, of kitsch and avant-garde. Indeed, it's this kind of radical pragmatism of Dutch architecture that, maybe against Colin Rowe, could be seen as a way to bring Chicago back into the modern. When Ben uses parametric modeling, in other words, it's not as a device of value engineering of an existing market, but he uses that technology in a way that historically technology has always been used in this city before, which is to say it's a means to realize fantasy, to make possible a new market, not simply to cut corners on an existing presumed market. That is, historically, Chicago has offered the potential to abstract its situation and impose artifice in the world. But today, as the city turns from artifice and abstraction to an uncontested naturalism and realism, we could well ask how Chicago is Chicago architecture, and perhaps conclude not very. That's to say that Chicago architecture has nothing to do with the accidents of where you were born or where you pay your taxes. By the way, it's due tomorrow. But has everything to do with what is the intellectual project behind the work, with the way in which you might extend a disciplinary problem, a set of challenges and opportunities that was historically associated with this city at one point in time. And so it's in Ben's projective use of new technologies to realize the otherwise unrealizable, his work on deep planning, his combination of the mass cultural excesses and modernist restraint, the way his infrastructural work, which is highly performance-based, is equally establishes new forms of imageability or new icons for a world that doesn't yet exist. The combination of artifice and abstraction that really makes Ben, I would say, the most Chicago, one of the most Chicago architects working today. So please join me in welcoming Chicago's Ben van Berkel.
That was a wonderful introduction, and I feel at home, I tell you. And I'm maybe going to explain later on. I loved your Dutch accent, actually. I mean, you're really having a wonderful Dutch accent. And I will learn you more tonight. What I will do, I will talk about the work, but not in the sense like maybe I would do in other times, where I would take one project, for instance, and then go in depth in the project and explain the procedures and the working relationships of who and how we came to the ideas of the project and the production of the project. But particularly tonight, I'd like to talk about ideas and how we come to or concepts in our work through the instrumentalization of working methods. And let me start to say that when we did our pavilion for the Venice Biennale last year, we called it project switching on and off the changing room, and maybe even before the time where we were coming into a situation where we are in right now, economically, culturally, politically, we were thinking that our position as an architect was going in the wrong direction, in the sense of that we were asked to produce, and maybe we were part of it. Every hall of every city had to be filled, and almost every client was asking for the next icon building. And the pavilion was actually critically, intuitively predicting that this could not go on like it went. So what we argued was that the external forces of architecture, like its economical, financial, etc., cultural qualities, could be more consciously be switched on and off in the relationship to the internal regulations of architecture, where the internal regulations of architecture are not so often questioned, and particularly in good times, when it comes down to the play of its double reading, its innovativeness, its play with geometry, construction, its public communication, the way how architecture with its internal quality could communicate from the internal out to generate an image, what could be maybe an after image, an after image what stays in the mind, so that you would come back to the project, and instead of generating an image that hit you in the face immediately. So this pavilion was a kind of prototypical project for, and maybe also a prediction for what we wanted to work on over the next coming years. But let me start with this first diagram. It is an. Can I move actually around? No. Yeah, thanks. That's good. So what is important about this diagram is that it is a model. It is a model of a way how we have been working with it in several projects. It is prototypical. It is playing with the idea that an architecture could have an equal potential organization. On the other hand, it could have a side where it is infrastructural and dynamic and more equal potential, but in another manner of, let's say, the equal potential reductive system of this system on this side here. We use this model for many different projects. Like, for instance, this was the model we used for the train station in Arnhem, whereby you have an entrance for the train station, 2 bus stations, and bicycle parking underneath here. You have the train, high-speed train track on this side here. So the whole infrastructure side was connected towards more quicker program on this side here, but to a more slower program on this side here, where you would have offices and who needed a particular kind of equal potential reductive system like we know it. So, or in the Graz Music Theater, what is just finished, we had an entrance lobby on this side here where the public would come up or in the whole entrance condition, and you would go to the theater where you have a highly flexible room with performances to be given for many different qualities of opera, jazz, pop to be performed in this theater, and needed for that reason a black box kind of organization. So what I'm saying here is that how could, with a particular model like this one, what is more transformative, how could you test out certain qualities of problematic, combinatorial qualities in relationship to this geometry, but is not or either articulated or reductive. It is transformative. It is, in our opinion, when we came up with this transformative ideas in geometry and architecture, was that we wanted to liberate architecture from its minimal approach or its articulated approach. We wanted to liberate architecture from its stylistic reference to open it up by being more transformative with it. And Bob mentioned it already, the house in upstate New York was already dealing with this idea of the equal potential rooms, like the kitchen, the upper part where you have a sleeping room where you can hide, but then you come in the middle part of the house, or could come to the middle part of the house, and that was this part of the house where you could meet, you could communicate with each other, you could sit on the stair, you could see each other. This part is the the articulated part where it connects itself also for the first time in this corner with the landscape. So again, the transformative is here to be found in a house there where it moves from one geometry to the other. And maybe the house is okay, not there anymore. Luckily enough, we talked with the client again and rebuilding it. In a sense, the house became a pavilion, a prototypical pavilion for many ideas we used in other work later. And this is another pavilion we did here in the United States, in Philadelphia, in the museum there. It's called the Holiday Home. It refers to a lot of ideas we were working on in the time when we did this pavilion. That why do we have this escapism often to go to another place that could be the ideal place as a holiday home, and not bring the holiday home home? And what would it be like to bring the holiday home home? And that pavilion is all about that. I mean, maybe there are more pouches to be found, the windows where you could stare at, and the color plays about with this idea of being in an embraced space where you could really meditate and contemplate. And these ideas have been transported to many other projects, like in this case it's the vertical foyer for the theater we did in Lelystad, where when the crowd goes up, when there is a play, and you have a lot of diagonal and horizontal, vertical communication within the building, and the color plays a very important role. You cannot see it so well in this image, but everyone looks good in this building, especially when you're dressed up with this pink color being wrapped around you. And the argument was also, I don't know if you've seen the building, it's orange, it's really bright orange when you see it from the outside. It's also there to say, why do you have theaters never the communication on the outside, that they are in theater and the lobby is staying the same? Why can you not yourself be part of and celebrate with your friends that you are maybe a part of the catwalk where you walk on and dare to be seen before you go to the theater? You're part of the theater. You see some images of the foyer in here. So the idea of the mutual color that can take up many readings and many interpretations, or can mutate in literally many colors, like in this building, is an experiment what came out of that same period, where in this building, it's an office building in Almere, we have a glass with a foil between it. I mean, it's a product we really invented ourselves. We patented it and made sure that we could use it in many other projects later on as well. But in different ways. Like in this case, we used the glass in a manner whereby it would generate different color shadows and would play with the time of the day. And it's almost so like, you can see this lady having a rest during lunchtime, that with this yellow time, where you have this yellow shadow, you can read the different moments of the time of the day in the shadows of the reflection of this internal court of the building. And the idea was also to play with the idea, or play with the colorfulness of this internal court, that it would be almost like every day sunny in Holland, and you know we have not a lot of sun in Holland. So the transformative aspect of color being reorganized and dynamically be differently articulated was then in the next project we tested in a department store here in Seoul, where we argued that it is so crazy to come up with a full collage of waste of billboards, waste of energy, waste of time to rant with each other, like in this project where we had many shops to be found, you know, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, everyone's here. I had to convince them that it was much better of bringing big bands to facade to make one facade and could operate like a lamp within the city. And like in this comparison, try to convince everyone that maybe much more interesting also to pixelate like a pointillist painting, an integral approach towards the building, like maybe like an artwork, than let's say wasting time and energy with this approach. We use also LED lighting for it, what of course we all know is far more efficient. In the later work, this is a small project we did for a laboratorium in Groningen. We played with a similar kind of transformative quality of a formal and an articulated approach towards the way how you could play with the context. In this case, I mean, you cannot see the link between why this building on this side is here green, but if this turns into green, then you will see the link. And that's where we are often connecting our architecture to when it comes down to time and the change of time and the articulation of time towards the way how the building communicates with its surroundings and its users. I mean, often in earlier examples of our work, we try to explain it through the way how, in the history of architecture, through the method of collaging and working with different entities, columns, walls, floors, or like in the work of Houseman, later on in the work of Berkel, elements, fragments could be organized in a disconnected manner, or could be displaced in a connected manner. But you can see here in the phase of Berkel's work that the nose turns slowly into an ear and maybe also part of the eye. And this transformative aspect of architecture is having had always more interest, but I hope you can see it in the back, but this is an animal, and it's a snake, a lion, and a man who combines in one image. But you can't see the scenes anymore of the face. You can't see the boundaries of the information, of where the information comes together, and that the white ball and the black hole of the face turns into an organization where it is difficult to point at where the real information comes from, is where I think that architecture is having such a challenge to be expanded in a possibility whereby it doesn't have to be so clear, where you find the pragmatics or the utility of the space to be combined with the aesthetics of it, even when it is unbearable, the aesthetics or the pragmatics of the way how this space might function. In a way, there is nothing to explain about the face. If we know the expressions of the face, there are, I think, more than 7,000 expressions we can give to the face. And this is this transformative aspect of one surface what can be turned in so many different articulations is where I'm in a sense talking about. In early parts of the work, where this transformative and the time model came in was particularly there to be found in the Möbius house, like how from one quadrant to another quadrant in the landscape you could move from a sleeping room, working room, and again into a living room, and she wanted to have her working space over here, and he wanted to have his working space over here. We combined these activities of living, working and sleeping into one band, where all the furniture, articulations of rooms, the material quality of going from the outside of the house to the inside of the house with glass and in concrete were to be combined in this organization of the house and instrumentalized. And I really would like to clarify that the most to you, we were not always literally transforming the diagram or the models we were interested in into the architecture, not literally in the sense of formally literally. We were always interested in instrumentalizing it, transforming it. And that's, you have to understand that is a far more different approach than working from an idea, a sketch towards a form. From a sketch to a form, we often use a linear representational model of design. Whereas I wanted to get away from the representational model. I wanted to rethink its process of design, where it came down to the way how you might have a very dynamic process and diverse process in the organization of design. There maybe were also in the introduction I said use technology as an advance in the design, because I've often seen, maybe in the words of Foucault also, that technique is already social or public before it becomes a technology. I see techniques and design techniques as an opportunity to communicate with each other in a new manner. And in the Möbius house, what a lot of people say when they come into the house is that they have seen the images of it and they think it's very complex and very articulated. But when they're in the house, they recognize a sense of quietness and calmness. And in order to bring that calmness in, we introduce also a serial quality in the geometry of the house, like the degrees of the house are used only in three ways. The 7 degrees, the 9 degrees, and the 11 degrees are repeated over the whole system in the house, and through that repetition, like in music, you do get a kind of serenity or calmness, but it's not introduced by proportion, but by playing with geometry in a manner whereby you can rethink its organizational qualities and communicates different than to the spectator than expected. And these ideas have been continuously tested out in later projects as well, like this pavilion for the Venice Biennale, as I mentioned in the beginning. It is an organization that starts as a line-like structure. The line slowly turns into a surface, and the surface turns into a volume. And this is, tested in projects before, like the Mercedes-Benz project, and of course the Möbius house started with it. But here, what we for the first time tried to do is to radicalize the idea by turning the surface into the roof. Like you can see here, the floor becomes the roof, and the roof turns into a wall, and then captures again the floor and turns again into a ceiling and a wall. And it's column-free in the sense that the surface actually picks up all the qualities of architecture, where you can see the things be embedded and absorbed in the architecture, so that construction, infrastructure, how the rooms are programmed are all combined into this one gesture. So switching it on and off as the argument to also be experiencing here the changing room, as we call it as well. And the changing room was filled with videos, and whenever you came into the room, it was like if you would be redressed again, and we thought through the system of to the system of the pavilion itself as well. In one of our latest work, the music theater for Graz, what's quite interesting there was that the idea of the transformative, like the eco-potential to the transformative again of the articulated area in the building, was so transformed that here, as you can see, with again the ecosystem on this side here, and with a more articulated area on the other side, that we with this try to incorporate the public coming into the building, although it's a school, it's a university building, where students are educated on many levels of different aspects of the choice you can make, as I already mentioned, also jazz, pop and opera. This is one of the most well-known international schools on music, where here again the line turned into a surface, and is part of the construction, also the way how walls carrying the floors cantilevered out of the whole organization the main theater itself. And this is where our interest is, that it is not, when we use these models, that it is not so that they are form alone, but they pick up inclusive aspects of architecture. This main structure in the middle carries this whole floor, and then on the outside of this floor there are thinner columns who are standing outside of the facade. And then the whole project was skinned with a similar approach where it starts here as a box-like structure and then it ends up in a more softer structure at the beginning of the project. Influences of instruments and music notation through the history of music have been playing a role in the way how we have used them into the articulation of the building, like in this case on the facade, filtering the light coming into the building, but are then projected in many different ways also within the building, in a manner whereby it's not only used two-dimensional on the facade, but then suddenly becomes 3D or 4D in the way how you would move through this pattern in the building itself. And here, as I mentioned also in the Möbius house, it was a play between the way how he would experience in a way music. You would not listen yet to music, but you would experience it, and maybe there was a bit kind of eye music going on in the same time as well, when you would enter on the first part of the project, the building. Specifically, when you would look up, the whole aspect of this articulated musical experience would be complex to be understood, where on how which floor you would be, especially in the way also how we triggered the articulations of the ceiling so that they almost look as they are on the same ceiling, but they are on two different levels. And the complexity of the articulation of these forms have been designed much earlier than all the projects I have showed you before, apart from the Möbius house. But Villa NM, I'll show you later the Mercedes-Benz project, but also the pavilion in Venice have all been influenced by this theater. Although this theater was finished the latest one, so you can imagine you can see it a bit in the work, but it took a while to get this project from the ground, almost 10 years, with a lot of political trouble at the same time as well, but I spare you from that. But so, as I said, the form and the articulated aspect of going up from the entrance area with the staircase going to the main lobby. You have here the artist foyer on this level there. The public can come into this university several times in the month to look or listen at the same time, of course, to the performances. So it's a building with a double use. And you see the link between these articulated patterns being turned into this three-dimensional, more spatial pattern in the middle of this foyer area. The skin is very tight in the sense of it looks like it is closed off during the day. It pulls it like a dress almost over the whole building and closes it off, but in the night it really opens itself up and then creates these possibilities of a public to be seen also from the outside. Well, I didn't explain this, the whole construction in detail, but the beam structures of the central column or the twist you saw in the middle of this foyer space radiates out to the edges and then is slightly and lightly picked up by these light columns on the outside. And the lights are following that same pattern in the ceiling structure at the same time. These are the smaller rehearsal rooms. And this is the main hall where, as I explained, you could have many different performances to be performed in this room, where On the one hand, we had to work with the natural acoustics, and the panels are here with different reflective and absorptive materials have been used to enhance that natural acoustic aspect of the room. But we work also with a lot of electronic acoustics in order to make it also for contemporary music. A lot of contemporary music is also experimented with here in this room at the same time. So if I want to then connect this link towards one of our latest projects, and you know that is the museum in Stuttgart. It's the Mercedes-Benz Museum. Here we tried for the first time a trifold organization. What comes out of the Möbius is it is in a way a Möbius structure, but it is a trifold Möbius structure whereby a minimal service picks up in a trifold an edge condition, turning it onto itself back into these three circles around the central part of the building. This diagram has been constructively also been similarly used in the design of the building. And these services maybe you have to know are Seifert services. Although I don't want to go into all the technicality of the mathematics and geometry too much, but what has been having our interest, and maybe I showed it a little bit into the effect of the manimal, is to be highly inclusive with our structures, so that in one gesture we could have incorporated an infrastructure, a program, construction, a way how internal regulations of combinatorial qualities of external forces and internal regulations could be all combined into this one gesture. The building operates so that you have three elevators bringing you to the top of the building. Then there is one pathway showing you the collection of the car, and there is another pathway that shows you the history of the story of the car in the other routine. So there are two pathways, but you can always step over from one system to the other. And the collection of the rooms are in a way the rucksack spaces of the exhibition spaces of the historical rooms. So you can meander around. You start at the top, but you walk down like in a time machine. You are the car when you drive down in a way. When you walk around in this building, and the car stands still. So this is the same diagram, but then further explored. You can see that here this little sketch model. So again, if you would put your pen onto this line, then you cannot take it over anymore. You cannot take over your pen. So it's continuous, and it's turning again into a surface, from a line into a surface, and then slowly turns into a volume. This is the situation of the project next to the highway. It's a very awkward location. It's next to the factory of Mercedes. You have the high-speed train on this side. Here, soccer fields. Daimler is having also this sport fields around this side. And then you have the wine fields on this side here, and the inner city is around the other part of the building. Technology and computational design has been, like already said as well, has been our major fascination. I mean, I believe that like artists, often through new techniques, I've noticed that through there you can reinvent, rediscover. If Seurat had not been misinterpreting color photography, then he would not come to pointillist painting. So through new design techniques, new painting techniques, you can discover, experiment with the imagination of the possible spatial organizational qualities you are after, then pure through the imagination alone. Imagination helps technology, and technology can stimulate the imagination, and the other way around, as I explained. But the effect of it is that sometimes, like in this model, with this project, we had so much panic on the project. We had almost 1.5 years only to build this highly complex project, because the building needed to be finished in a very strict time. also with tight budget. What is strange maybe to know because it was a highly commercial project, but it went very well with Mercedes, but it went very bad when we started with the design of the project with the company, and we were forced to stay within the budget. And whenever we on a Friday would sit together with a client and all the parties involved, we had to be in the budget. So it might sometimes have been that we would stay until 3 o'clock in the morning to be on tight schedule with the planning and the budget. But I explained this model, and that we in that time started, and now I'm talking about that, it's now 4 years ago, with this design. And then at that time we had not yet discovered scripting, although we had made a program what scripted with a 3D model, and whereby we could have a local change coming from around 200 companies working with us in the system, and we could animate the local change into the whole system in almost in half an hour. But that was such a major discovery, because we discovered that not only for the architect it is interesting to work with 3D modeling techniques, and we know that, I mean, today we can really do everything with a computer almost. That's maybe the problem of architecture today, is that we can expand with architecture so far that almost every form, every liberation of every form is now possible. But my argument has been always, how can we discipline that complexity? How can we bring it down to a particular kind of quality of a discipline where you can really also instrumentalize it in built form? And this model gave us continuously a tool to communicate with all these different companies, with the changes they gave us, because it might have been that some of these companies might give you in a day 50 changes. We could elaborate on these 50 changes, we could change them into the model, and then send back the model to all these parties in the same day. And that was such a discovery that design technique could also become a management technique of the way how you work together with all your different parties. And becomes, in that sense, also a relational strategy of design instead of an oppositional way of working with design. Often we know that architects tend to argue towards the client, this is my design and you have to buy it, otherwise I'm out, or this is not. We don't believe in that approach. We believe far more in a relational, complex manner of working with not a specialist along with the client alone, but also with our own specialists. And these specialists might be from a fashion designer to an economist or philosopher, but we try to incorporate it in the process in order to come to the optimum of the quality of the design. This is my favorite picture of the building. You see how complex, I mean, it was really 200 people on site working day and night to get this project finished. Building phasing diagrams showing you that when we would go up in the building, then being on the 3rd floor, 4th floor, then at the same time we would start with the internal organization of the building itself at the same time. Luckily enough, there was money for making some models, so this is the biggest one we did. To test the twist of how it could be made, and into concrete would actually be as good as we hoped for. The twist element, as I showed you in the earlier diagram, comes back 4 times. So although the work often looks complex, but there is a form of repetition in the work to be found in order to make it, I'd like to call it not sustainable, but attainable. Maybe attainable is a much more better word for that, because it combines affordability with sustainability. So I hope you remember that word, attainability. And it really made it possible to build this project quite quickly. I'm not going to explain the whole technology, because I said I would talk about ideas, but this idea I have to explain. This was a very complex smoke detector system we invented for this building together with engineers. It is a tornado sucking up all the smoke when there will be a fire through the roof of the building, introduced by blowing fresh air into the atrium and then sucking, what I mentioned, all the smoke out of the building. And meant that we could reduce down 30% of the materials in the building. So we could reduce with this not only the budget for the project, but also 30% of the building. Because otherwise we had to compartmentalize all the different segments of the exhibition spaces within glass or facade elements within the interior of the building. So you can find it in the Guinness Book of Records actually. The city department people of Stuttgart were standing here videoing the event during the test, because they for almost 2 years explained this, it is not allowed, cannot do it. We have to compartmentalize the different exhibition spaces. We said, no, we have a technique, we've tested it on smaller projects, and we can show you when the building is finished. We can show you close to the finish. We can see the experiment, and actually it was allowed. The videos went, or the DVDs went into the archive as a proof that it was possible. Another quite interesting aspect of the concrete core activation of the building is this water line going into the concrete. It's a water line that goes in length from Stuttgart to Paris. It's an incredible long water line, but it is going through all the concrete, and it means that only in the morning we have to heat up the building for only 3 hours, and it stays in the concrete for the whole day, keeping it warm. And in that sense, we and maybe that's not because we are Dutch, but it is maybe it's maybe a German invention to be more sustainable than the Dutch are. But we had to work not only from the client side, but also from many parties, especially also the worker, with all these new opportunities, and we discovered that we could reduce down an enormous amount of maintenance also on the total cost of the project. I talked a bit about model making, but this was the strangest model we did, big, 1 to 13, and the client asked for this model and never understood why we had that model to be made. Although we did it, never understood it. But what was funny is that the client then came with a little car, 1 to 13, put them into the mall, and then we understood why they were. This is not a model, this is the real building. It's really so that if you come out of the building, this is the end of the project. And almost like in a dream or a surrealist dream, cars are really above you, underneath you, whenever you're stepping down this staircase, and then maybe you step down this staircase, or I go up for a little cafe, what is here. But this was the argument with this building, and the client at that time, when he gave us the project, was quite amazing, visionary. He said, I don't want a showroom, I want a museum, and I want to really have it so organized that it will be one of the most public buildings in Germany. And we had to visit a lot of museums in order to make this project work. And then I liked it. I liked it so much that he was such a visionary. And one of the arguments he gave more was that if there are so many people who collect cars, and that is a culture, why not really making also a collection of the cars where people can enjoy the car? And when we came into the MoMA, he was totally heavily excited, because then he saw the helicopter hanging as the first object you see whenever you come in the MoMA. Arguing, you see that what I always said, if you look back to the Bauhaus, industrial design was going together with art and architecture. And I love that. I mean, a person who really was so visionary and wanted to make a building that was more than only a showroom. And for that reason, we made a building for him that was really a museum. And one of my interests in museums was always to think of a possibility that you would see the art never frontally. And maybe inspired by the book of Rosalind Krauser, I don't know if you know it, it's called The Modern Passage of Sculpture. It's a beautiful book talking about art to be experienced in many manners of how you would approach it from different angles and positions, and became an influence for this building, whereby you would never see an object frontally. You would always see it from above, from underneath, or you would see, whenever you would come into an exhibition room, you would see it from a higher level, and then you would choose where to go to, and to then make the selection of the object you would like to see. The building is in scale very difficult to read, because you see here 2 floors, although it looks like 1 floor. So it's very, when you're outside, or especially inside, you think it is only a 3-story high building, whereas there are 6, 7, even 8 to be crossed over and combined with each other. And the articulated spaces who are always on different levels, because there are 2 pathways crossing each other, linked up also with the facade and the view to its highway on the other side. This is what I mentioned, so you come higher into the exhibition space, and then you can make your choice and then select which object you would like to see. We had an incredible opportunity to design all the details within the building, the lights, and that you would not look into the lights elements, as you can see here. This is the one collection room I mentioned, with the panorama of Stuttgart in the background. Columns are always on the edges, and the ceiling just lifted up in order to let the facade almost disappear into the room, and as if almost the ceiling is flying above you. So make it very light. It looks as a heavy building with all its heavy concrete around it. If you come into the rooms, then they become hopefully very light. And of course, I mean, part of the square and the test track has been an important influence of the way how we came to the project. So often I like to think of architecture in this way, that it could be a camera as an artwork. Maybe you are the camera, but on the other hand, the object in itself can also produce an artwork. And this is what I believe architecture should do. Architecture should produce its own artwork. And all what I've said and maybe explained is maybe also to be found in many ways in the pavilion we are doing here in Chicago, in the Millennium Park, and where maybe the ideas of the diagonal, not literally taken up alone from the opening up of the grid of the Burnham plan, were important. That you would work with an equal potential organization and slowly turn into an organization of a grid what is diverted into a diagonal grid, was something where we worked with, in order to come into a pavilion that could create a lot of vistas, and not only vistas, as I mentioned, in a clockwise manner alone. With strong diagonals to be found in the plan alone, but also particularly when you would stand in it and then you look out through it, you would have a lot of, in the section also diagonal views. And I think that's the beauty of Chicago. Chicago is not a dense city like New York. New York is far more compact, and it's often, if you are walking in between mountains when you are in New York. But Chicago is beautiful that it has that amazing amount of different small, middle, and large-scale elements, whereby you could have these diagonal relationships between the buildings, the park, and the lake. So as you can see, this grid, or the block-like roof, turns slowly when you are underneath the pavilion into this softer, more landscape-like reference. And maybe it refers also to the work of Anish Kapoor, in the sense of that maybe his pavilion is very reflective. We like to think of reflectiveness as a contemplation place where you could really come onto the stage, and there is a grid of light coming onto this stage, and the light will articulate the heat of the amount of people coming into it, and then light the pavilion more up. And then you could look through the openings to many parts of the pavilion, of the city. Sorry. And this is what I particularly mentioned. The inclusiveness of the whole project is also important. That construction, roof, ceiling, and the sheltering becomes one is key. And that then, of course, I mean, as I mentioned in the night, this light aspect could articulate with in many ways is one of the most important things. So if there is an architecture that can be switched on and off, then maybe this is an architecture where I'm mentioning, and its reading could be switched on and off. Its internal regulations could be switched on and off, and its external influences are carefully regulated in order to generate an architecture that, like I mentioned also, doesn't only generate one image, but produces many images, and hopefully an after image, because the after image is, in my opinion, is far more interesting than a representational image that is clear and that is immediately understandable. I hope that an architecture of a kind where we are working on could generate memories of the place, and such memories that you would like, maybe like a good book or a good movie, where you would like to go back to and reread again. Thank you very much. Questions? Yes.
You mentioned a couple times about sort of repetition as a way to increase complexity to the drawings. So the 7 different degrees, 11 degrees of Bowling's house, and so on. I'm just sort of wondering if that's something you employ to sort of preserve your sanity within your own design process, or is it because you don't necessarily want your work to be perceived by others as these
I wish that everyone could understand. It was a long question. Now, if the idea of repetition in the work is hiding complexity, maybe I can say it this way, or articulating a way of making it operate through other means. Is that your question?
Sort of, I think it is that, but is that for you or is that for others? Is that...
No, it's of course my interest, but it is not for me. It's my interest. It is my fascination to work with this play of the seriality of architecture. You know, there is a seriality in architecture that you can find in the modernist architecture through maybe the grid system, as we talked about a bit before we had this talk. So seriality has had my interest, like one can refer to music. But what is for me interesting is to prove, in a way, that there is a complexity in architecture to be found in such a manner, and it's a matter of how you work with this complexity. What could be even more sober and reductive and calm than minimalist architecture could be. And that's, so I'm trying to turn the circle with this. And also, because if you know all the experiments you can find in music, you like, for instance, in the work of Philip Glass, you can know that, you can understand that in its complexity of the composition of the work, there is often a form of calmness to be found, or in the work of Schoenberg or Mahler, etc. But it's a very interesting question, because it's of course so that that you want others to read it. It's not important that I work with my own fascination. It's there in order to make that double reading of the complexity be experienced. Yes.
There's a lot of, obviously you're interested in this project with continuous surface and Mobius strip and the line model or Jesus model to grow. And the sort of the manual is the skin of the face is a continuous surface that brings together all the sort of the morphology of the three animals or four animals. But with the pavilion, as distinct from some of the projects that you showed, it's not continuous with the floor, right? Yeah. It's the walls and the ceiling. So why did you decide to make it like an object standing on a platform rather than as something that is continuous with the floor as well? What was the reason there?
In this case, we were interested to give the pavilion simply legs, and not to like what I said. It is not so that the notion of continuity or articulatedness in the work does have to be that side of the work. I think that it is sometimes so that even you can also see that in the early work that you might find it work highly box-like buildings, like in the laboratorium building. It's not a full box, but it's almost a box. The articulation is only to be found in a slight movement of the facade. So so this notion of continuity is not to be found in that project at all. It is also not so that I'm highly dogmatic on the notion of inclusivity. It's what I said. It's the transformative aspect where I'm interested in, and where it ends and stops. It's often a decision we look for when it's having a particular kind of reason or meaning why we want that. For instance, I mean, if you would, you could go on with this discussion about the Mobius belt, for instance. You could argue, well, the Mobius belt is finished also somewhere because there is probably somewhere a door in the Mobius belt. So they'll be disrupted, no? And that's true. So I'm not dogmatic about it. I only use these geometrical principles as models, and then I transform them. More.
Jeff has a question.
Yes.
The most alluring photograph image that I saw in your incredible presentation was that column of smoke.
Yeah.
For me, that was really moving. And your work has always characterized a certain heaviness in the structure. And yet, now with that smoke, there arrives a quality whereby you have justified the heaviness of the work. So I'm curious, in this time when advertised your talk as a moment to talk about ideas, whether you may be thinking of the ethereal, the effervescent, any of those words whereby you could, now that you've done the smoke project, move towards something that actually lets concrete go away altogether, and you make effervescence.
Yeah,
I'm just, you're saying the computer, you can do anything with a computer.
Yes.
For me, that's what the computer can do.
Yes.
And I'm curious whether we are, with that project, we're now able to look at a kind of architecture that leaves the heavy matter of concrete and into something of real invention.
Yeah, but go and see the building, because what you will discover is that organization, although maybe the double helix is already done in architecture, in Baroque architecture you can find a double helix staircase. If you go and see that that building, you will discover that also the project on its heaviness, concrete heaviness, is also extremely light, like I already suggested, and not so particularly because of its play with the ceiling alone, but maybe because of the way how the theme of walking around in many times is introduced in the building. Like, it's not like that you walk in a Gideon like a frontal 2.5D space. It's almost like spaces are following you in this building. It's not so that you're walking in one time. You're walking many times, and that's due to the complexity of the building. So it is, honestly, I mean, it's, and I would like to say that in my modest, arrogant manner, it's an innovation, the building, really. You can never find anywhere in the world this type of organization, so complex, in this way of how it is, again, instrumentalized in this building. So you're right, I mean, this aspect of the smoke detector was an innovation, but the building itself and its organization, and especially its spatial experience, is so kaleidoscopic that you would not find it in any other building. So for me, that is the ephemeral and the lightness of it. What is the most important? You are in a super complex time machine. It's a typical time-space condition you could not find in any other space today, and that's what I wanted to make. And there's, you can go for a light architecture, but then I don't know if you've followed the MoMA exhibition, Lightness, I think it was called in architecture, something that was, I think, roughly 10 years ago, where we had, similar with our group, a discussion about light architecture. And then you can find that, for instance, in the work of Toyo Ito, for instance, or Tsushima. I mean, there you can find a kind of light architecture that talks also a little about thinness. But that is a literal transformation of light architecture. I'm much more interested in, actually Craig Lynn's reading of lightness was quite an inspiration for me. We had in that time an amazing amount of conversation. He called it differential gravities. How to play with differential gravities in architecture. And I think this is the project that plays with that idea of differential gravities. Not that you would fly in the building, but you would really feel differential when you experience this building in many manners. And he compared it to the mall's movements. You go up and down, and you have diagonal space, but in the way how you would be in a space where you create other kind of forms of lightness than, let's say, literal lightness.
When you're talking about the Mobius house, you talked about the difference between how it's represented in photographs and the sort of complexity that is made in photographs, and the serenity that they have to experience in the building. And I was wondering how if you do it all, how you reconcile it representation of the architectural project, either built or unbuilt, and the experience of it after.
That's what I said about the different ways of approaching design. If you approach design in a representational manner, like if you start from the sketch or from an idea towards a form, that is a model of working what I find too restricted. So if you are able to be experimental with your design approach, whereby you incorporate almost maybe a possible idea of what could be an experience of a spatial, like we just discussed, be in a building, then ideas of repetition come in, or the contradiction between complexity and reductiveness could come in. Like I mentioned before, maybe the notion of proliferation of an experience could come in, or the unfolding aspect of an experience could come into a spatial experience, then let's say a representational model of an experience, whereby you could predict almost the experience. I'm very interested in the unpredictability of spatial experiences. And that can only be tested out in the way how you bring that into the design process. You cannot apply that to a linear design process too easy, because then already it's, you will, predictiveness is then to be found already in the predictability of that what you could already have seen or predicted in your mind before you put it on paper.
Sometimes the upper plane scoops them down to the ground and are only walking on the top surface of them. And other times they come down and you have edge condition.
Yeah.
I don't know if you made that way. It's represented in some of the drawings that way. Was that a practical difference for you? Is it an intentional one? Is it a key of some deeper thought to what these different scoops are doing? So for example, as soon as it comes down, there's the edge of the material. It's almost like a step up.
Yes, I mean, yes. Yes, there is, I mean, this play between the upper plane and the lower plane, actually in the renderings, I mean, that's why the question of, if the legs are really touching. You will see later on that the ceiling and the plane where you stand on are almost similar. Now it's rendered almost like if they finish too hard on the plane, but you will see that they almost work as a reflection. And that the details are much more smoother than you saw in the renderings. So yeah, we wanted to have that again double reading of it. Thanks. Thank you very much.